Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Emma Dench, Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Harvard, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining this GSAS alumni panel on the future of the arts. So within my lifetime, there's been no other time when we have so desperately needed the arts and appreciated their value. I bet many of us have been replaying snippets of Amanda Gorman's poem and her performance over and over in our minds since yesterday. On a personal note, I grew up in a household profoundly affected by the fortunes and possibilities of the arts. My father was a Shakespearean stage actor, and we lived from theatre season to theatre season. These days, I have a cousin and nephew who are actors, and another nephew who is a professional puppeteer. And I hear from them how the precariousness of art and artists has been exacerbated by the current crisis. But I also hear how art has found a way, many remarkable ways, as it often does. I'm delighted to introduce my wonderful colleague, Robin Kelsey, who will in turn introduce our distinguished guests and moderate the discussion tonight. Robin is the Shirley Carter Burden Professor of Photography in the Department of History of Art and Architecture, and a world-renowned expert in photography with many lauded books, articles, and honors to his name. As Dean of Arts and Humanities at Harvard, Robin practices his commitment to the arts and humanities every single day to the benefit of us all. But most important of all, he is an alumnus of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences and earned his PhD in what is now the Department of History of Art and Architecture. So we couldn't be in better hands. Thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you, Emma. It is a great pleasure and an honor to be here. And I love the fact that you mentioned Amanda Gorman in your introductory remarks. As everyone probably knows, Amanda is a proud graduate of Harvard College. And I did once have the distinct honor and pleasure of sharing a stage with her. And I was never more convinced that my presence at an event would be entirely forgotten within 24 hours as I was on that occasion. Amanda is extraordinary. We've known that for years, and now the world knows it as well. So it's a great pleasure to introduce the topic today and the panelists. It's a wonderful moment to be asking ourselves about the future of the arts. The art world has experienced a succession of shocks in recent years. I would say that the beginning of the digital era has been one such shock, with many attendant changes in habits, expectations, desires, and economies. And then we had the pandemic, another distinct shock, which reminded us of the dangers inherent in being such an interconnected and environmentally stressed world. And thirdly, we've had the shock of the political division in our society and the calls for forms of historical reckoning that pose tremendous challenges to our society. So whither the arts in this extraordinary time? It's a wonderful question to ask. So I'm going to introduce our fabulous panelists in alphabetical order, and then I'm going to give each a chance to make some opening remarks on this topic. So I'm going to begin with April James. April received her PhD in music from Harvard in 2002. She currently manages the Kislik Center Reading Room at the University of Pennsylvania, but that is just a start for April can juggle many things. Well, actually, she can literally juggle many things because juggling is just one of the many things she juggles. She is also the founder of the Maria Antonia Project, which aims to restore the work of women composers to the living repertory, and she has curated on that subject matter as well. She is a mezzo-soprano who has performed as a soloist at many venues, and she is also an accomplished student and instructor of Baroque dancing. So April, it is a tremendous pleasure to have you with us. Second in alphabetical order is Raquel Jimenez. Raquel is a PhD candidate at Harvard in education, as well as a Ford Foundation Fellow and co-chair of the Harvard Education Review. Her research focuses on young artists and the communities from which they come and the community support that they receive. In other words, her work focuses on art as civically supported and art as civic inquiry. So Raquel, it's fabulous to have you with us as well. Thank you. Third in alphabetical order is Glenn Lowry. Glenn probably needs no introduction, but he's going to suffer my introduction anyway. He received a PhD from Harvard in what was then the Fine Arts Department, also the department from which I received my PhD. He received his in 1982, and he is the David Rockefeller Director of the Museum of Modern Art. In his more than 25 years at the helm of Moma, Glenn has accomplished more than I could possibly recount in these brief remarks. But let me underscore his recent leadership of approximately, according to reports, $450 million or so renovation and expansion of the museum, which led to a much anticipated reopening in October of 2019. And for those of us who've been fortunate enough to see the new museum, we know what a tremendous achievement that renovation and expansion has been. Since this panel is taking place among a community of Harvard people, I will simply note that New York Times critic Roberta Smith gave the curators who worked on the reinstallation a gold-plated A+ for their effort. We don't, in fact, give A+ at Harvard. And if we did, I don't think they would be gold-plated. But anyway, it's an extraordinary encomium to the curatorial staff at Moma and a testament to Glenn's leadership. Finally, we have Arguro Nikolao, who is a 2018 PhD in comparative literature, hailing from Cyprus, but currently working out of New York City. Arguro is a writer, a scholar, a filmmaker, and more. While at Harvard, she participated in the secondary field in critical media practice in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And I'm particularly thrilled that she can represent that program, which was pioneered by professors Peter Gallison and Lucian Castaigne-Taylor. It's been remarkably successful and is currently the most popular secondary field in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And it has produced remarkable alumni, including Arguro. She is widely published, and her short films have been shown at festivals and exhibitions in Europe and the United States. And she currently has a postdoc at Princeton, which I understand is a reputable institution in New Jersey. So with sincere deep thanks for their willingness to join us tonight, I am going to give each of our panelists a moment to make some opening remarks on the provocative question of the future of the arts. So April, the floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you, Robin. I don't know how provocative my remarks will be. I think that from my perspective, I think part of the future of the arts is to go to the past of the arts. You know, I am a music historian, and I'm a specialist in 18th century music and dance. And I am a big proponent of everybody making arts, right? So, you know, the way people used to have a harpsichord in their house, or, you know, spinet, or some kind of musical instrument around. I really believe that that's part of what the future is going to be, is that everyone's going to have to get back to making music, making art, really making it a part of our everyday experience. Because, you know, the more people that make art, the richer the society is going to be. And also people just appreciate the arts when, even if they are not professionally engaged in the arts, if they are making art, they can then appreciate someone who is professionally working in the arts. So I'm really a big proponent of that. And yeah, let's just start with that for now.
Thank you so much, April. I will confess a bit of autobiography. That is, I was one of the worst trumpet players in the history of that instrument. But nonetheless, despite years of failing to learn how to play the trumpet well, I do appreciate great trumpet playing better than I think I would have otherwise. So I'm a living testament to the truth that you articulated.
Thank you.
Raquel, thank you, April. Raquel.
All right. Well, it's so wonderful to be joining this conversation, but I have to admit that as I was preparing my remarks, the particular challenge of considering the future of art when the future of practically all else has been so uncertain has been difficult to ignore. In many ways, we're grappling with a kind of collective cognitive dissonance. And by that, I mean that for many of us, we have the task of kind of reconciling the narratives that we might hold about the land of opportunity with an often uncomfortable and disappointing reality. And so against this backdrop, I believe strongly that one of the most powerful roles of the arts lies in helping young people contend with this challenge by providing young people with a necessary and in many ways unparalleled arena for learning to manifest the contents of their imaginations. In many instances, this is already happening, of course, in communities across the country, from developing murals that surface untold community histories to theater performances that are aimed at shifting the narrative that surrounds mass incarceration. Young people are in fact deeply invested in using the arts to make sense of their lived experiences and to make themselves seen and heard in new ways in public life. And so as an ethnographer of youth culture and the arts, I've had the privilege of watching this process unfold. And in many ways, to my surprise, the basic contours of the creative process can indeed survive online. I've seen young people that are still mining the contents of their lived realities for sources of creative inspiration, and young people engaged in often lively and heated debate about their works in progress. But underneath these kind of ordinary dynamics, I think something quite special is also happening. And that is that young people are being encouraged to think quite expansively about their potential roles in society. They're being asked to consider how they can connect their creative practices to current events and how they can leverage the expressive power of the arts to create a space for much healing, much needed healing, dialogue, and reflection in their communities. And so my work suggests that young people are really drawn to the arts precisely because of this reason. They see the arts as a means for engaging in underappreciated acts of civic imagination. And so studying the role of art in young people's lives can help us appreciate not only the future of art, but how we can use arts to shape a future that is more vibrant, robust, and just.
Thank you, Raquel. Actually, I just want to interject that everything that you said is so in keeping with my experience of Harvard undergraduates in the arts these days. Both the degree of social engagement and the extent to which the arts are a way for them to come to terms with the world that they live in, both for themselves and for others. And the demand for our art classes is booming, I think, precisely for those reasons. So thank you for those thoughtful remarks. Glenn, what thoughts do you have from your vantage?
Thanks, Robin. I just want to assure you that no matter how inadequate you may thought you were as a trumpeter, I was a far worse flautist, to the point that all around me would leave immediately as soon as I started to pick up a flute and try to practice. So, but it does build an appreciation for those who can actually play an instrument and play it magnificently. So when I think about the future of the arts, I generally think about it through three lenses: the lens of the artist, the lens of the public that consumes art, and the lens of the institutions that provide opportunities for artists to be seen and heard. And, you know, from that perspective, it's important to realize that the last year has been devastatingly difficult for artists. There's probably no other segment of our society that has suffered more than artists have. They were already on the edge, and I'm thinking particularly performing artists, but all artists. Their careers were put on hold. They don't have pensions. They don't have steady income. Institutions closed. Audiences disappeared. So this was a brutally difficult moment, and yet somehow, and I think it's because of the fundamentally creative nature of human beings, but especially of artists, they found something in that solitude, in the peace, in the isolation that was imposed upon them, and have started. I've seen more interesting art in the last couple of months produced during the pandemic than I saw before. And that is because artists are inherently creative. And when we think about the future of the arts, the one thing we know is artists will continue to make extraordinary works of art that ignite our imaginations and help us see and understand the world we live in. When I look at this through the lens of consumption, those who acquire works of art or those who go to institutions to see or hear works of art, I do think the future is very different. We are seeing profound changes to the consumption of art, whether it is the pivot to the digital world and the reality that social distancing has imposed on us, so that institutions that had focused on bringing people together in creating engagement and participation have all had to learn how to disaggregate participation from the experience of looking at and seeing and enjoying art. So I think, and I don't think these changes are going to immediately revert back to pre-pandemic days. I think we are going to see an ongoing impact in terms of how people see, engage, consume, and enjoy art that will be with us for a very long time. And that may be, in the way that might manifest itself is that there may be a real hesitation to return to the physical. Not that people won't do it, but they may not do it as quickly as we hope. And I think there will be a real recognition that the digital has become a very robust way to see and enjoy art, knowing full well that you cannot reproduce a work of art in the digital world as it was or as it is in real life. Finally, I just want to pivot, and these are just points of departure for perhaps further conversation, to the institutions that enable art to be seen and heard. And there I think we are, again, looking at dramatic and profound changes. Most American institutions, maybe most global institutions, have seen an enormous contraction in their resources, in their staffs. Of course, their publics have largely disappeared. The kinds of exhibitions that we are used to, the kinds of programs that we are used to, are all being reconceived and reshaped. And because it takes years to come back, the impacts of today will be felt for 3, 4, 5, 6 years at the least before whatever the new establishes itself. And I am concerned that the incredible audience that emerged over the last 25 years for art, particularly the visual arts, that fueled cultural tourism, which can be criticized if you wish, because it produced large numbers of people visiting museums, but it also produced an enormous interest in what we do. And that interest spread out way beyond our walls. And I worry that as people have realigned their interest and patterns because of the last year, they may not come back to our institutions in the same way, and they certainly will demand of our institutions new approaches and new ideas that we have yet to put in place. So I think there's a lot that will change as we look forward.
Glenn, thank you. I agree with you that each one of those is a seed of a larger conversation, and I hope we get to some of those conversations as we move along. Arguro, how about you? What is your offer?
Yeah, thank you. Those are very hard acts to follow, but what I wanted to say comes from my perspective as a practitioner, as an artist, a filmmaker, and as someone who comes from an academic background. And for me, what I think about when I think about the future of the arts, especially in the context of the pandemic and in the context of political uncertainty or instability or a contentious political environment, are these three things. Firstly, it's about how artists can navigate the pandemic, especially with regards to how involved do you get with the pandemic in your work? How much does it affect what you do, and so on and so forth? Because I know with discussions through friends and other colleagues that this is a big thing. Are we considered to be reactionary? Should we be looking ahead to the next thing, the post-pandemic sort of content that people will be anticipating? How is that even, possible? We work within the worlds that we inhabit. So I find that that's an issue that's been coming up a lot in my conversations with other artists. And to add to that is the engagement with the digital. Glenn touched on this, how much do you pivot towards new media, and in what ways do you do it? How much do you take on? How much do you sort of disavow? Can you survive if you disavow the digital as an artist or a filmmaker? So all these questions. Now, the second point that I'd like to make about the future in the arts, from my perspective, is especially in conditions of extra precarity, or at least in conditions like the pandemic that have highlighted the precarity of artists and of art workers and cultural workers in general. How do we make sure that we continue to engage underrepresented communities and underrepresented practices and so on and so forth with funding and income and sort of resources dwindling for whatever reason, whether that's because there's less people visiting institutions, there's less performances. I mean, the whole of Broadway has been shut for, it's incredible, for close to a year now. What do we do to make sure that the people who still, and the institutions who still have, who are still afloat in a way, how can we pull sort of people and other institutions upwards? And I'm thinking especially about artist-run spaces or smaller art-run spaces in New York City, but also in general. And the third point I want to make that is particular to my background as an academic as well is how can we use artistic tools in research, but how can we think about art making as research and pedagogy as well? This is something I think about a lot in a project I'm doing now with students at Princeton. We're doing a devised theater piece online. I've only always done performance on my own. I've written it on my own. I've performed it on my own. But now we're taking a whole group and we're writing together and we're acting together. And it's scary, but it is a moment of experimentation as well. And I think it should be a moment of experimentation, both for academics and educators and for artists as well. So there is something to be said about this pause that the pandemic has given us. And and to regard this pause as an opportunity and not be too afraid of the market forces that sometimes intervene and dictate what an artist, can or should do in order to place themselves in a certain position or to sell better, or and so on and so forth. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Arguro. What you were just saying in your last point about the relationship between art and research and the kind of collaborative inquiry that the arts can foster is something that we're really trying to embrace as well. And I think there's really been a sea change at Harvard in the last 10, 15 years, the extent to which the arts are treated as an area of intellectual inquiry of the same gravity and the same seriousness as all the other forms of scholarly inquiry that take place on campus. And it's been a remarkable change to see. And I think it was probably overdue, but it's very, very exciting to see it come into being. Thank you all for those wonderful and very stimulating introductory remarks. We have a wonderful array of questions that were submitted in advance for this event. And I want to thank all the alumni who submitted their questions. So I'm just going to run through a few of these and see where they lead us. Many of them touch upon issues that one or more of you have already raised. So here's the first one. For the past 50 years, social cohesion in the United States and in many other countries of the world has declined. What role do or can the arts play in creating spaces for connection and community building? And Raquel, this is very much links up to things that you were saying in your opening remarks. So I wonder if you could say a few words, because I hear this all the time. People hoping that somehow the arts can bring people together. And I'm curious as to your perspective on that issue.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the question very much. And it's certainly been something I've been considering, in the midst of multiple social emergencies, and of course, in the context of a deeply fragmented and polarized media landscape, arenas for collective sense-making and dialogue, which are, of course, the core pillars of a shared civic culture, are just few and far between. So I think that being said, art experiences and forums that can provide a space for collective dialogue, inquiry, investigation, sense-making will be profoundly important both now and moving forward. But specifically at the local level, I believe. Of course, our institutions have always excelled in providing us a window into far corners of the globe and to cultures that are distinct from our own. But I think what we have missing to some extent are arenas that really help us understand what's going on in our own backyards, in our own communities. And that can really help us grapple with, again, that cognitive dissonance, to make sense of the contradictions and complexities that are playing out globally, but of course are filtering down into our own lived realities in ways that are difficult sometimes to comprehend. So I think that arts experiences that meet that local need for sense making, and experiences and institutions that can frame our own community cultures as a meaningful context for inquiry, for engagement, even celebration, will be profoundly important.
Thank you. I'm struck by the fact that in your response, you mentioned shared civic culture, and you also emphasized the local. And I think these have been two things that the arts have been deeply involved in historically. And yet they do seem to be in tension with the internet as a platform for the arts. And one of the things I've been very struck by is the extent to which the internet is mainly talked about in the arts in reference to access, which I appreciate. It's given people access to many forms of art that they otherwise would have not had access to. But in the political sphere, we often talk about the internet in much more ambivalent terms, as something that separates people into different self-selected communities and become echo chambers, and that there's a loss of traction on the real. And I sometimes wonder, well, how does all that play out in the arts? And so I'm curious, as you talk about shared civic culture and you talk about the local, do you have thoughts about the role of the internet as a medium for the arts in that process?
You know, I guess I think a little bit less about the specific technological tools that are facilitating the experience. But when I do think about, you know, the internet and what it makes possible, it does seem to me that one of the key affordances is facilitating long distance connections, allowing to travel places that we physically cannot travel to necessarily on you know, in everyday life. So that being said, I still feel like the internet and the technologies that we have are marvelous for a slightly different thing, right? I still think that there is a need to understand what's happening in our communities, in our backyards, you know, who our neighbors are, and to be really focused on that, you know, on that sort of micro level of exchange. I don't find that technologies are particularly useful for that purpose.
Yeah, I think finding the right combination is going to be really critical. Glenn, do you have any thoughts on this issue of social cohesion in the arts from your perspective at Moma?
I think it's dangerous to instrumentalize the arts. You know, the fractures that we have seen in civic society are the result of decades of action on the part of the left and the right that have seen a dissolution of trust in facts, none of which I believe, right? I am a fact-based person, believe fundamentally in the importance of the arts. But I think when we ask of the arts to help mediate the social fabric, to be the common ground in which ideas can be shared and experiences can be lived, and that we can forge those common ideals, we ask a lot of the arts. Because the arts that is not their purpose per se, nor is it necessarily even the purpose of the institutions that purvey the arts. It is a byproduct sometimes, but it isn't necessarily the core mission. But I worry about the role we ask of the arts when we ask the arts to do more than what artists are capable of doing, right? Because in the end, artists are charged with making art, right? They're not charged with necessarily transforming society or even healing the wounds of society. And so the institutions that support those artists, and that's what we do in the museum world, we are the platform, a platform that enables artists to be seen, heard, experienced. We hope that by providing a common space, that it will enable the divisions, intellectual, social, cultural, to, at the very least, engage each other. And I'm naive enough to want the arts to do more than that. But realistically, I worry that that's more than they can do, and that it's a complicated problem to move past the reality that the fracture that exists may be so deep that it cannot be bridged.
I certainly share your concern, Glenn, that sometimes people are looking to the arts as a kind of deus ex machina that's going to come save us from ourselves. And I think everyone's got a role to play. Artists may have a role to play, but I don't think it's going to quite work in that way. Arguro, do you have something you want to add to this? I sense as much. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. No, what I want to say is I think one way to mediate this pressure on the arts and the artist is to really think about what do we do when we look at art or when we experience art? What does that do to us? So I spent so much time on Twitter these past few months, and my brain is mush. I mean, okay. So what do I mean by that? I mean that technology and these kind of ways of communication are moving so quickly. It's like Spitfire, it's rapid fire at you. And we get information in snippets, and our brain and our thinking is it's totally fragmented. Now, to have the opportunity to sit through what we call slow cinema and watch 4 or 5 hour film, or to walk into a show in a big gallery space at the Moma or another institution, and walk around and sort of take the time to slow down and contemplate and think outside of these frameworks that are very important. We have to be thinking about politics and society and so on and so forth, but how do we think? Right? How do we think? Do we slow down and think carefully, or are we taken up in a tide of sort of these fashionable tug of wars sometimes that unravel on the internet? And I come from a place that's defined by conflict. I grew up in a divided place, Greeks versus Turks. That's a very simplified approach to it, but I grew up with this kind of polarization, and the answer is not to keep like pushing it to the extreme and keep talking about it in the same way. We have to take a step back and sort of shift a little bit and retrain our brains, not retrain our brains, but practice thinking more slowly, more contemplatively, and through reading, through watching slow cinema, through going to an exhibition. For me, that's the big effect that art can have, and that has an effect on how we build ourselves then as citizens and as neighbors, as Raquel mentioned.
Yeah, and I'd just like to jump in here if I may, because I'm finding that too. I found that in my own work, as I've gone through my career, and my career has evolved from music through physical theater to now poetry and visual art, that I've had to slow down to make room for inspiration and to get away from a lot of those things. When you're applying for grants as an artist and stuff, and there are all these kinds of boxes that people want you to be in. Oh, you get, you can get a grant because of your skin color. You can get a grant because of the gender of your body. You can get a grant because of this social movement, that social movement. And I've had to step back and say, wait a minute, because my most recent art project is April plus Madison. So it's me, and it's the guardian angel of my creativity, Madison Hatta Sonneteer. And it's very inspired by Alice in Wonderland and Lewis Carroll. And it's, I've thought about applying for grants, and I wanted to, in fact, do a solo show. I've written a solo show called The Twinkle Bat Variations. And I was planning to do it as a solo show. I thought originally that was going to be the way it would get out into the world. But even before this last year, I realized that, that's not how I want to build community. It's not about me picking up and traveling and going someplace and staging a show, and then picking up and staging a show and picking up and doing that. I found that Madison works best actually via one of the older technologies, radio, or as we now call it, podcasting. And so the sonnets, and Madison writes, declaims these whimsical sonnets. Each sonnet takes about 1.5 minutes of your time. So in these, attention starved times, right, when people's attention spans are so short, well, 1.5 minutes, that's all it'll take for you to listen to a sonnet and have an experience that connects us as a community. Is very interesting. It's like a community over the internet. And a community also, though, when you think about inspiration as creating community, it's kind of the same inspiration that led to Mozart's works. He always claimed that the symphonies and all his works came through him. He didn't actually compose anything. He just tried to write it down as he heard it. Goethe too also talked about the role of inspiration in creating his works, and Lewis Carroll talked about that in his work. So I think that we're talking about community in the sense, community, yes, individually, but community also spiritually, and bringing that and the time for contemplation into work and getting people back into that kind of space.
April, thank you. Both your comments and Arguro's make me think about the extent to which one of the things that we need to do in the arts and humanities these days, and we do focus on it, is just opening up different modes of attention for our students, because their modes of attention right now are so channeled by precisely the factors that you've been citing, that just giving them the possibility for other modes of attention, for a kind of longer wavelength of thought and receptivity, is a dramatic and radical thing for them. And it's exciting to hear what you have to say. And April, I also just want to add as a footnote that the music department from which you received your PhD recently hired a wonderful composer named Yvette Jackson, who works on radio opera, also reviving that notion of radio as somehow a medium that has tremendous currency these days. And one thread that I hear running through some of what has been said from your opening remarks onward is something that I very much like to underscore for audiences that may include people from the technology sector, other sectors who are looking at the arts, and they think about innovation, and they sometimes think about temporality as running in one direction, like it's going to be the new. They look to the art for the new, and they don't always, I think, appreciate the extent to which art and the humanities are in an endless mode of recycling. And then in fact, when we look back on great works of modern art, whether it's Courbet or whatever it is, that these artists were in many cases carrying through something from history that was deeply important to them, and finding that it had new viability in a different moment, and could say something new in response to different circumstances. So I very much love bringing that into the mix of this conversation. So I'm going to move on. I think we've gotten through one question, and we've used up an enormous amount of time, which I love, because these are incredibly good questions. And I wish we had all evening, but let's move on to the next one. And April, I'm going to start with you on this one, which is, how can the arts address the representation gap in audiences and in performers and artists?
Well, goodness. I'll just in 2 minutes I'll just solve this entire problem.
That would be great, and then we can move on to some other social problems.
Okay.
That would be
okay.
great.
Good. Okay. So when I think about it, sometimes I think about that question in relation just to where arts institutions are located relative to the audiences that want to participate in them. One of my favorite places to go when I'm in New York, so I'm a native New Yorker, one of my favorite places to go would be Museum Mile. Museum Mile is on Fifth Avenue, and it's a wealthier part of town. And if you're trying to reach more diverse audiences, not all the people who would come to something, that you're far away from a lot of the diversity that makes New York, New York. If you're in Museum Mile up there, in the 70s and upward on Fifth Avenue. Now, I would go, I would travel into Manhattan for that. I'm native of Queens, so I would travel into Manhattan for that. But there are a lot of people that won't travel that far. And right now I live in Philadelphia. I live in West Philadelphia near the University of Pennsylvania. A lot of the arts institutions, when they have concerts and stuff, they have them in Center City. And again, just logistically, how many people are going to travel, even though by New York standards, like it's nowhere, it's so easy to get there from where I live. But still, people won't necessarily travel 20 minutes, half an hour to get someplace where music's being made, or a theater is happening. So it might be that we have to start thinking about repertory theater stuff, or arts closer to where the diverse audiences are, and really thinking about, and also technology. Technology is good, like the internet is actually good for reaching people who won't travel to art. Philadelphia's, the Chamber Music Society has been doing, web-based concerts for the last better part of a year. And that's reaching audiences, but then again, you have to have the technology. So we are also coming up against, a little bit of a technological barrier. Do people have the technology to engage in something that's on the internet? So.
Thank you. No, that's great. And Raquel, this gets us back to the local. And I'm sure in your ethnographic research, you've discovered things about the relationship between a community and the arts produced right within that community. And I wonder if you could speak to this issue as well.
Sure. Well, the community that I'm studying in many ways is regarded widely by historians as the sort of bedrock of industrial capitalism in the United States. And with that comes, of course, the forces of deindustrialization and now a stigma that sort of looms over the community. So I'm finding that much of the young artists' work that I'm studying is really wrapped up in issues of representation, not so much that they want to be represented in the arts necessarily, but I think more, to put a finer point on it, they're interested in using the representational tools of the arts to shift the stigma that surrounds their community. And so I would very much, in many ways, agree with so much of what April just said. It really resonates with my own thinking and work as well. Of course, the diversity discourse is permeating nearly every corner of the arts right now, but I think it's quite important to be mindful about the ways in which that we're framing the problem, because of course that suggests how we go about solving it. And so I think that, conversations about inclusion need just a little bit of a tweak or a nudge. From my perspective, it's perhaps less about including communities in what already exists elsewhere, but rather making sure that the communities themselves have the resources and outlets that they need to expand upon what is already happening. Communities already have culture. They don't have to necessarily travel to institutions to get culture. So I think it's really about, providing resources that amplify, extend, and help young people speak back to the forces that are unfolding in their communities.
And I take it that public resources are going to be critical for that, in your view.
Ideally, although, of course, we have a bit of a challenging public funding infrastructure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To connect what you're saying once again to what's going on at Harvard, just for this audience, which I assume is interested, but our wonderful professor, Sarah Lewis, in History of Art and Architecture, who teaches a course, Vision and Justice, that has attracted national attention, makes such a compelling case for the extent to which these issues of representation that you're underscoring really should be at the heart of what we study when we study art history. That it is, that it is not just a history of formal experimentation and so forth. It is also a history about making things visible, making people visible, making conditions visible, making issues visible, and making them visible in particular ways. So I think that emphasis on representation is exceedingly important. Glenn, how do you get people to Moma from Queens? Like April's kind of just told you that it's a long way. It's a long way. So how do you do it? Oh, you're muted, Glenn.
Yeah. Sorry. I think April gave the answer in her query, as it were. She was prepared to travel to the Upper East Side because there was something there that interested her. And I think the reality is people move around a lot, and they move around because they want to go someplace. And I think it's incumbent on institutions that want to attract a broader and more diverse audience to recognize that those audiences are there and they are interested, but you have to engage them. You have to be willing to develop the programs, develop the collections, develop the installations that engage their minds, because people will travel to a baseball game on the drop of a dime, or they'll go to their favorite restaurant in some other part of town. It's not that they won't move, that they won't go out of the locale in which they live. It's that often they're not motivated to do it because, at least in the case of some of our major institutions, we don't have the programs and exhibitions that they're interested in seeing. And I think the issue of representation, and you mentioned Sarah, and I agree completely with this, the issue of representation is the issue of visibility. And it's the core conversation that is taking place in American museums today, how to make visible the richness, the complexity, the diversity of American culture and American society, and how to do that in a way that is thoughtful, that is engaging, and that is enduring more than anything else. So, you know, it's easy to live in the moment, but I think we also have to make commitments to make profound and complex change that alters the course of our institution. And that cannot be done without either resurfacing works of art that are already in our collections that perhaps were made invisible because they didn't conform to an institution's understanding of importance at the time, or to make the effort to bring in those new voices and different voices that haven't been present, and to ensure that they remain visible. And this is the key thing. This is not about suggesting for a moment that one program will engage some new audience that will suddenly see an institution as a new home. It is the sustained commitment to those programs, day over day, week over week, month over month, year over year, that builds those audiences. And that takes nothing away from the granular relationship that people have with their local institution that may be a 5-minute walk from their home. But I think people want rich and complex experiences and are prepared to move around for them as long as they are of interest to people. And I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that our programs, our installations, our exhibitions are of interest to a broad and diverse audience.
Thank you, Glenn. All right, I'm gonna move on to another question from one of our alums, and this one I'm going to direct to Arguro. So this one is for you to lead off on. What has the epidemic taught us about the importance of in-person performance with live audiences? If audiences are important, can we do live performances differently in the future to engage and involve audiences more fully?
Thank you for that question. I think we are all of the same mind that we love live performance and we love to have an audience. And I think people are craving to be in a space with other people, either, you know, to watch a Broadway show or performance art or whatever it is, or dance. I'm also a social dancer. I dance tango, and we haven't been able to dance tango in a year. I mean, I don't think we'll be able to do it for another year, maybe. And that for me is a profound loss that the pandemic has imposed on a large part of the population. And I think that we'll never, I mean, the people who have gone through this pandemic, right, and are adults or teenagers during this time, we will never sit in an auditorium with the same kind of nonchalance ever again, right? I think we'll always be carrying this absence and this lack with us. So we'll arrive to auditoriums, I think, with much more gratitude and sort of being much more grounded in how special that experience, that live experience is. But at the same time, I do think that something about the digital and the online space, which is definitely not a substitute for live at all, not a panacea, but I think it's forcing people to think beyond the boundaries that sometimes artists that are in performance themselves or in dance had put themselves in, right? So I was very skeptical of live streaming, Zoom plays, and so on and so forth. But I've been exposed to so many things. And going back to your point, Robin, about the recycling that happens in the arts, I watched an interpretation of Chekhov's The Seagull on The Sims, right, by New York Theater Workshop. Now, The Sims is this online game. Okay, I didn't get it 100%, but there was something there. I felt like there was a new thing happening. I couldn't access it 100%. So I think we won't be able to leave this digital experimentation that's been happening for this year sort of out the door and then restart, as Glenn mentioned. I think we're gonna see kind of interesting combinations of things. And for me, the most important thing as well is to be able to transmit live performance to audiences that can't make it into that auditorium anyway, not just because of the pandemic, but as you know, April mentioned, the distance from certain institutions. I think one thing that institutions and art spaces have perhaps really gained from this traumatic experience is how the digital outreach part is not something to, it's not an extra burden, but it can be a boon because it can draw a lot of people in. And I experienced this firsthand with film festivals this year. I had a short documentary making the rounds, and we couldn't go to any festival, but the number of people that watched short films online was incredible compared to the number that would have watched them in the actual physical auditorium. So that's yeah.
No, I think that's all very well said. We are nearly at the hour of 8 o'clock, and some of our participants may need to peel off, but I'm going to keep us, if the panelists are willing, for just a few more minutes so that we can continue the conversation. So April, what are your thoughts about the future of live performance as the pandemic recedes?
Well, the future of live performance is live performance will come back, but I do like, to riff on what Arguro said. I think that digital performance has an important role to play in the future as well. I really think that we'll see a lot of combined forms of art making, combining live and digital, and especially as definitely I think as it regards audience participation. The Vienna Philharmonic did their New Year's Eve concert, and they had an audience of 7,000 people from around the world participating in that. People who would never be able to travel to Vienna for New Year's normally could participate. And I think that kind of thing definitely has a role in the future of the arts.
Robin, can I just jump in and add, I actually think one of the most interesting things that's happened in the last year is that it's forced everyone to really look at the digital world through a new lens, because it was the primary world that was accessible to all of us. And that one of the consequences of that, and I think a profoundly beneficial one, is that it's accelerating the collapse between in real life and virtual reality. And that it speaks a little bit to what April and Arguro were saying, that I think we're going to see a much more seamless relationship between online and offline, and that the two will cease to be different spaces. They will become part of the same space, experienced differently, but we're going to learn to use them both as a tool and as an experience in a ultimately, I think, seamless way. And I think that's really exciting. So that whether you're on site or off site, you're going to be engaging with the issues and the ideas you're interested in, and that artists are going to learn how to create for both spaces. We actually have a project that we're doing with Amanda Williams that is going to be online and on site at the same time, in which it's a performance piece, but where she is really thinking through how you work these two different spaces simultaneously and together. And I think we're just going to see a lot more of that.
That's very interesting. You know, I think universities are going to have to experience that very soon, because those of us who've been dealing with exclusively remote instruction since the pandemic became full throttle are going to be moving to hybrid forms where some people might not be able to be in the classroom while many others are, and we're going to have to experience this liminal space between the virtual and the everyday. Raquel, any thoughts about this question of live performance in the post-pandemic moment?
Well, to be honest, I'm studying a crew of muralists. And so it's actually one of the few art forms that I think is in some ways able to continue quite fruitfully in this time. It's socially distanced and not quite experiencing the same challenges. So I don't think I have anything profound or interesting to say on this particular question.
So then, Raquel, let me ask you about muralism, because we've been talking about recycling within the arts. Now, murals have arguably a continuous history over many generations coming to the present, but you can also argue that there have been certain moments in which murals have played a special and very prominent role in the arts. And those moments have been moments in which the relationship of the arts to public discourse has become incredibly charged and important. And do you see this moment as being such a moment for muralism?
Oh, I think absolutely. Even frankly, predating the pandemic for sure. Again, thinking about the specific community that I'm working with, and which of course is specific, but the generalities can apply so many other places. It's also a rapidly gentrifying community. And so for the developers that are coming in, one ways to fix and sort of remove the stigma that surrounds this community is to remove the people that live in it. And so for young people that don't have full access to the democratic process, public art making and the tools that avails to make their own perspectives of their community visible, to make those part of the cultural discourse that surrounds the community, to be able to articulate a counter narrative, has been incredibly important, not only for them as artists, but developmentally as teenagers, as adolescents, that have to contend with the stories that are told about them in their communities, and have the opportunity to also craft their own narratives. So it's muraling is fantastic. The scale is huge, and they're really able to put their fingers on the scale in a way that they might not be able to otherwise.
Thank you, Raquel. That's such a powerful and upbeat note upon which to end. I think we should bring this wonderful conversation to a close. And I just want to thank all of you for participating in this conversation. It's been a tremendous pleasure for me. And I will turn it over to Emma for some final remarks.
Thank you so much, Robin. And thank you, to April, to Raquel, to Glenn, to Arguro for just such a fascinating, fantastic, wonderful conversation. Your conversation tonight, to me, exemplified the best things about the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. I love that the theme of slow thinking in the most positive possible sense came out time and time again in what you said. I think of slow thinking as a rejection of the easy answers, very characteristic of the students and alums of the graduate school. I think about all your creative approaches to seemingly impossible problems. Again, just a complete hallmark. And it's a very proud moment for me to see the graduate school played out like this tonight. And I want to thank everybody who's, I'm going to say, because we went retro and we talked about radios, so I'm going to say I want to thank everybody who's tuned in tonight. And thank you so much for engaging with our GSAS alumni panel. And I very much hope that we get the opportunity to share space virtually or in person again very soon. But warmest thank you again to April, Raquel, Glenn, Arguro and Robin. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and thanks everybody. And good night, good morning, good afternoon to all of our listeners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. April, it was so great to learn about your work. I hope we can connect offline.
Hey, thank you, Raquel. Yeah, so I think the same thing. I'm thinking murals. You should be in Philadelphia.
That's right. Yeah, the mural arts program is there.
Yeah, it's all, murals are all over this town.
Wonderful to meet you.
Wonderful to meet you.